Hi everyone, Amy here. I just wanted to check in about a few things regarding last week's discussion workshop. I did provide some comments in my midweek update last week that had to do mostly with the summaries themselves. And so today I'm going to be focusing mostly on the commentary and feedback that you provided to one another, as well as your reflections that you did at the end of the week. So first of all, I'll go ahead and talk about the commentary that you guys provided with each other. I know this was our first discussion workshop, and so of course you guys are still getting the hang of it. But I do want to point out in the instructions that it does say that you should first do in-text commentary in the margins of the draft, and then you should also address each of the following prompts in the instructions in an end comment, and that should have been addressed separately outside of the marginal comments that you provided. And so there's a couple of ways that you can do this, and I saw different people doing different things, and it's fine as long as you make sure that you cover both steps in the process. So some people uploaded two separate attachments. One of those that I saw, for example, here was in Vanessa's thread, which was one of the original earlier posts, I believe. Oh, maybe not. I'm just looking for it. Okay, there it is. So you can see here that, Devin not only posted an update on Wednesday that he was going to be reviewing the essay and would get it there by Friday, so other students knew not to spend their time on Vanessa's essay. Devin then uploaded the attachment with the questions answered, as well as the attachment with the in-text commentary, and then you see the writer's original, the original writer's reflection here at the end. And so this is what the overall thread at its most basic level should look like, with all of the different components of the assignment included. So I just want to make sure that everybody's doing both parts of the peer review and not just a paragraph or not just in-text comments. All right, and so jumping into those comments a little bit more specifically, I wanted to point out some examples of good, in-depth, and particularly constructive feedback. So I noticed that Garrett did it a little bit differently than what we saw in Crystal's thread. Vanessa's thread. However, it was still correct, because you can see that Garrett has provided Brandon with both in-text line-by-line commentary, as well as answers to all of the 9 questions from the instructions. We also saw that in Cassie's feedback to Aaron this week. Let me see if I can find that post. Here it is. Okay, so again, Cassie had a couple of different posts, but it was still all there in the multiple uploads that she provided. So here were her answers to the questions, and you can see they are written in complete sentences, very in-depth. Even though there's a lot of positive feedback, there are constructive suggestions as well. And then we also see in the second attachment some really in-depth line-by-line commentary as well, and that's particularly helpful so that the answers to the questions can make a little more sense. Because if you make a suggestion, for example, in response to one of the workshop questions about the thesis, you could then make a comment actually on the draft itself where the person has represented the author's thesis. Another couple of sets of really good feedback that I saw, I really liked what Rebecca provided on Devin's original post. So let's take a look at that. Again, on Wednesday she checked in, said I'm going to be working on this. We have the 2 attachments and then a reflection. So let's take a look at what Rebecca wrote. She's got some really in-depth line-by-line commentary and the answers to the questions as well, right here. Let's pull that up. And you can see she's gone really in depth in her answers and saying, you know, where she thinks things need to be improved and things of that nature. So this is really similar to what I was trying to show you guys in the video from last week that kind of walked you through the process of participating in the workshop. You know, really providing in-depth feedback, not just, oh, here's a few things you did well, I think this was good, I think this was good. But instead actual suggestions for how to fix things, and then when there is, you know, some positive feedback, then specific examples of what is being commented on there as well. And then so the last set of comments and feedback I'll show you is from Denisha. This was probably the most in-depth feedback that I saw. You can see not only does she have the check-in on Wednesday, she's got the 2 attachments, she's also got a kind of summary, and then Mariah's got a really in-depth reflection that responds to all of this. So this was a very successful thread. And again, just take a look here. This is the depth of thinking that you are striving for in your review. This is among the best peer review feedback I've ever seen. And so if you know you're ever wondering what I'm looking for, this is a good example of it right here. And I'll just show you the in-text comments as well. And you can see they go very in-depth and very specific and also correspond to the answers to the questions that were on the other attachment. Okay, so those are just some highlights on the comments that you provided to each other, and I really just wanted to give you a sense of what I'm looking for, strengths and weaknesses, so that you can then learn from that and emulate it as we get into our future workshop discussions for the remaining 2 essays that we'll work on this semester. The last thing I want to talk about here today are the reflections that I saw, because I saw some really deep thinking and some interesting points being made as you kind of synthesize the entire process of the workshop discussion in your end-of-week reflections. And so, as always, I pulled out some of the highlights, and then I tried to organize those highlights according to several themes that I saw recurring in most of the posts. And so, if you don't see your comment highlighted here, that doesn't necessarily mean that it wasn't a very effective reflection. I just tried to pick out examples that were indicative of the themes that I saw recurring in all of the posts. And so, I did want to point out this first one because it came from a student who did not receive a review of their original essay. And so I thought this was a good example to show everyone, because it is important to still complete the reflection even if you didn't receive a review. And it may be confusing as to how to do that, but I can show you this one here has done a good job, and it talks about what it learned and what it saw in others writing and throughout the entire process of the rough draft workshop, even though this person didn't receive any direct feedback. So having read other papers and reviews and comparing them to my essay, I think I could improve in the following ways. I left out some important information from the article. I don't know how, but after reading it again, I noticed some things I should add. Also, there were a couple of spots in the essay where I evaluated Johnson's work instead of summarizing it, so I can definitely improve on that. Also noticed some punctuation errors that I need to fix, and then a kind of plead for some feedback there. And I thought this was really good because it shows you that even if you don't get feedback from one of your peers, you can still come up with some ideas for ways that you might revise your essay. So it's not just about the feedback that you get from other people and the revision suggestions you get from your classmates on your own essay, but how can you look at what other people have done and then bring in some of the suggestions that maybe you made for someone else to your own writing? And so that is really kind of the next level of revision and peer review, is that you know, you eventually get to this place where you're able to look at your own writing and make those same suggestions. And so I thought this was a very powerful comment, and I just wanted to show it as a reminder that even if you don't get a review from someone, you still do need to complete the reflection in order to get full points. There were also a lot of comments that kind of extended the conversation or asked questions of the reviewer. So here's an example of one. I feel that a lot of your suggestions will help me in my future writings. I'm a little confused when you say that I should use citations in text, though. I'm not really clear on what you mean. Maybe you can clarify. Thanks again for all the helpful feedback. And so I wanted to show this post from the actual discussion, because you can see it's a good example of where you might want to be checking back on the people that you provide comments to, because the conversation oftentimes takes on a life of its own and kind of keeps going, and if you don't check back, there might have been something that someone said to you that you didn't even know about. So, for example, let's see. You can see this is exactly where I pulled out this quote. Garrett has provided, as I showed before, some good feedback, but Brandon's asked him a question about it, and if Garrett doesn't check back, Garrett won't be able to answer this question, and so some of his feedback might even go unused, or it might not be as useful as it could be if it were fully explained. So I would encourage all of you to keep checking back. I know that you can still see the forums, but they do lock up at the end of the week, and so you can always email each other too through the class list here if you would like to provide some further commentary outside of the discussion itself. Okay, let me go back to my examples here that I wanted to show you. There were also a lot of really helpful revision strategies that came up. This is what I'm looking for primarily in your reflections on weeks when our discussion is a peer review of a rough draft. I really want to see the strategies for your revision that you pulled from the discussion. What exactly are you going to take back to your essay and change based on the feedback that you got from your classmates? So let's look at this one. Thanks for reviewing my paper for me. I totally agree with your suggestions. I think my paper could definitely use some structural organization. I could do this by tying together some of my sentences or compacting them rather to sound more clear and deliberate. I think if I was to support my thesis argument and switch my focus to the main points, then I could weed out some of the unnecessary deviations that I added. That's almost straight from the rubric right there. My introduction could be a starting point in creating a more direct summary essay. It's nice having a peer review. I think it gave me a second look at my writing and helped me take a step back. I think with your help and a little more time, I can rewrite my essay into a much better composition. Thanks again. So not only is there kind of a restatement of the task at hand or a summary of what needs to be done, but there's an actual strategy tied to that summary. I can do this by tying together my sentences, making them more compact, be clear and deliberate, start with my introduction to refocus the entire essay to be more of a summary, focus more on thesis and main points and leave out unnecessary details and things like that. So this is awesome. This is a direct plan for how the writer can go from the workshop to their essay to revise it before they turn in their final draft. This is exactly what I'm looking for in your reflections for workshop discussions. Along with revision strategies, the other thing I was excited to see you guys talking about a lot in this discussion was the peer review process itself and what it was like for you to engage in a peer review. And that was great to see because so many of you may not have ever participated in peer review before this class. And so that kind of metacognitive reflection is important as we understand why we're doing this. So when I was peer reviewing my partner's work, I was scared that my feedback wasn't enough or I would miss some things. But also peer reviewing someone else's work can help you learn some of the things that you're trying to figure out, as well as by seeing their mistakes and strengths. By peer reviewing someone else's work this week and receiving feedback, I believe I can make my paper stronger. So that's really cool because it shows what I think is a common experience is some apprehension at the beginning of the process. I don't know if I can do this. How do I, who am I to provide constructive criticism on someone else's writing? But then you can see by the end, giving and receiving feedback is a valuable learning process or part of the learning process. And I think I saw this theme coming up in almost every single post, is that based on your feedback, most of you or most all of you thought you could make your paper stronger. I also wanted to point out this example because it's a really just good example of in-depth thinking and kind of extending the conversation beyond just the topic of what we were talking about last week. So as you mentioned, one of the main reasons I was able to really relate with Stephen Johnson's article was the fact that I'm really a big-time Twitter user. I found Twitter as a medium to communicate with my friends as well as other users. I'm wondering myself, after Facebook and Twitter, what would be the next innovation in social media that would take the current technology. So this is cool because it's like asking a question, an inquiry question, that you might even want to go and do future research on. So it really extends the topic and even might connect into what we're going to do in the next unit. Okay, well those are the highlights in the reflections that I saw primarily in terms of what I want you to be talking about in your reflections for a peer review discussion. And so I just want to say, good job Keep up the good work in your future discussions, especially those that focus on rough drafts, and please let me know if you have any questions about your essays.